Composition of a Killer fans. Dr. Cassidy here. Today we're going to talk about Ida Schnell. She is 12 or 13 at the time of the killings. She was 12 or 13. It just different articles have different ages, but she is. This happened in 1907, so this is a pretty old case. As always, when we begin, just remember that the things that we talk about during this podcast are not to be considered any kind of formal diagnosis, clinical diagnosis. All right, so Ida Schnell was a German teenage child care provider, and she took care of infants, some, that were literally just born. So she was very well trusted, evidently, and she had a reputation as being very trustworthy and good with babies, even at that young age, 12 or 13. So I think that says a lot about why she had the opportunity to be with all these children. Certainly, you wouldn't entrust anybody to their care if you thought they were mean or evil or wouldn't take care of them properly. So she evidently had a history of being a good employee. But she had been in service with a number of different families as a nursemaid. And back then, remember this is in 1907, so back then, wealthier families would hire nursemaids to help with their children. And so this is what she did. So I'm sure it was word of mouth, her getting to move from, house to house. It doesn't say anything that anywhere that she was fired and then moving on to another house. So I'm making an assumption that whatever happened at that house, they thought was an accident, and then she was able to move on to another home, probably with a good reference from that house. So there had been no suspicion against her until the sixth infant had died a sudden and mysterious death. And even though it was only after the baby had been buried that it appears to have struck anyone that there was something sinister in the circumstance that her nursing had been associated with the mortality of the child. So it was finally decided to exhume the body of the last child, and he was 14 days old. And in this particular case, it was the son of a peasant proprietor of Ampermocking near Munich. And when I say a peasant proprietor, we think of peasant as being poor, but a proprietor is someone who owns something or is in charge of something. So this family probably was considered a peasant, but they certainly had enough money to afford a nursemaid. So the corpse was taken from the coffin, and the examination showed that death had been caused by perforation of the soft infantile skull with some sharp instrument. And then after this, and you keep in mind that this was in 1907, so they didn't have all of the medical advancements that we have today, but I think that was fairly obvious that there had been a pin stuck in this child's skull. And also remember that, I don't know if you have ever seen a hat pin or not, but she was using a hat pin, and it's not a tiny little needle-like pin. Hat pins are big. My mother actually collects them, and they're long. I mean, you can get them 8-10 inches long. So she was sticking a pretty large object in the head, in the soft spot of an infant to kill them. And I'm not sure if it would be, but I would hope that it would be an instant death. You never know. I don't know. I've not read anything that says that sticking something in the soft part of baby's head would kill them immediately, but I would hope it didn't suffer. So when they arrested Schnell, and that's another thing, Schnell is used in some of the articles and Shell is used in other articles. So I don't know if it's Schnell or Shell because there's some confusion about that. Just like her age. Some say 13, some say 12. At first, she strenuously denied having caused the child's death, and she protested that she had much too gentle a nature to harm the infant in any way, but under cross-examination during the trial, she admitted that she had killed not only the baby whose body had been exhumed, but 4 others for whom she had been engaged as a nurse. She confessed further that she had taken the lives of these infants by plunging a hairpin into the lower part of the back of their heads till they ceased to cry. Asked as to her motive, the girl said that the crying of the infants roused in her an unconquerable revulsion and excited her to such a degree that she lost all control over herself and would do anything to make them quiet. The next morning, she confessed to the 6th murder. And this news article is, of course, from 1907, said that Schnell, who will be 14 that following month, is physically well developed for her age, but rather dull-witted. Her father is dead, but she has a stepfather who is a day laborer in Schlesheim, to the north of Munich. Her series of murders was only rendered possible by the fact that, which will be a revelation to many, that in Bavaria, death certificates are frequently, and in the country districts, always granted by laymen. It's said that a doctor would at once have noticed the wounds caused by the hairpin. So keep in mind, this is not modern day, and you've probably got very little access to medical professionals. So the person who would do the death certificates, who would go in and see the person that was dead and pronounce them dead, they would have to know something about anatomy. They would have to know something about, mortality, how you kill someone, those type of things. And it just wasn't, broad knowledge back then. So it was a layman who did those certificates. And so nothing, again, was suspected until after the child had been buried and then exhumed. Now, another article from 1907 said that further inquiries are extending the grim record of the Munich child murderess Ida Schnell, and it's now believed that she must have taken the lives of at least 8 or 9 of the hapless infants confided to her charge. It has been established that she carried the coffins of 2 of her victims to the grave, and unconcernedly pocketed the fee usually paid for such a service. 2 of the infants, whom she had confessed to killing, were exhumed a couple of days ago, but decomposition had gone so far that it was impossible to discover on the spot whether or not they had succumbed to stabs of the Schnell girl's hairpin. The heads were accordingly removed and taken to Munich for laboratory examination. That's gruesome. I mean, I understand that that's what happened, but what a horrible way to say it, It's been ascertained that the girl, who is the illegitimate child of a drunken laborer, was brought up in circumstances of the most squalid and sordid character. Her whole record suggests moral insanity of the most pronounced type. The wonder is that even people of the humble class who engaged her as nurse cared to entrust their babies to a girl who was obviously little better than an imbecile. So, what this is saying is, obviously, she had a very bad, very unfortunate childhood. Squalid and sordid character certainly would alert us that this person did not have privileges, and certainly with a father that was a drunken laborer, that's not obviously a good environment either. So, I mean, she had a really bad, upbringing. But I'm interested in that it says that people cared to entrust their babies to a girl who was obviously little better than an imbecile. I think this speaks to the lack of understanding, over 100 years ago, of the development of children and the needs that they have when they're infants. I mean, we know today that from birth up to age 3 or 4, that's the most rapid growth of the brain. So we want a lot of stimulation. We want a lot of activity. We want loads of language. We want that child to have attachment to the mother or the primary caregiver. We want to see them thrive and be in a very positive environment, because we're not sure, even today, we're not even sure exactly the damage that occurs when during those first few years we are not able to give a child what we know can help them become successful, productive adults who are not abusive. So it's difficult for us to say. I mean, if we could say that, we wouldn't even be having this podcast wouldn't even exist. We would know this, and this is what happens to the brain. So if we prevent all of this from happening, we might not have serial killers, right? In this particular case, she was a serial killer because she had the cooling off period. And then she would take opportunity when she would move to a new home. That was a new opportunity. And my guess would be that she, became someone that they trusted exclusively with their child. She was obviously alone with that child during this time that it happened. And that gave her the opportunity, because I guess people back then didn't think that it would be possible for someone that young to do something so heinous. We know today that that's incredibly, it's rare. We can say it's rare because it doesn't happen every day. But we know it happens. We're intelligent. We read the paper. We read articles. We live in an information society. So it's easy for us to just Google a few words about a teenage serial killer or a juvenile serial killer, like I've said in other podcasts, and they bring up list after list after list of juvenile serial killers. There's also lists of juvenile mass murderers. Those are going to, of course, be the ones who go into a school and do a mass shooting. Remember that you're not a serial killer unless you kill, and then you have a cooling off period, whether it be a month, a week, a day, or 30 years, and then you kill again, So there's that cooling off period that sets apart the serial killer. So that's what you have in this case. She literally went from house to house and cared for these infants and then killed them because they were crying. Another article from 1907, this one is translated from French. It says that the preliminary judicial investigation opened in Munich against Ida Schnell. At this time, she was 14 years old, accused of murdering children in her custody, is now over, and the report of Judge Bally formally concludes a six-fold murder of the children of Oppenheimer, Bickler, Huber, Scheiner, Ritzerath, and Kermier. For the children, Gaylor and Scorch, the autopsy revealed cause of death that are not attributable. That's a weird word. Attributable to Ida Schnell. So the other two, there's two others that were, I guess, in that time frame, but they did not find anything that suggested that she killed the infants with her hairpin. Doesn't mean she didn't kill them. But again, back then you wouldn't have the scientific knowledge to be able to tell if they were strangled or smothered or had some other, untimely death. On the other hand, examination of the children Oppenheimer and Hubert clearly revealed the cause of death.